Everybody, welcome to another episode of Besides the Revolution. Jack, good to see you. I know we have been a few weeks in trying to make this one happen. Good to see you. How you been?
Oh, plodding on, busy. I've been wanting to do a podcast with you for a while now, Aaron, but, life gets in the way and we're still trying to test, what we can do and how much we can do and how often we can do it with this Substack. And I feel like we're doing pretty good.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying the morning posts. I've got to find time to do some more columns. And in fact, more coming on that because I have some thoughts. But, I'm going to be writing a little more, hopefully in the near future. But the morning posts, I think, have been really great, and I enjoy doing them every day.
Yeah, it's been fun. I hope our readers enjoy that too. I think that's been one of my favorite things to see happen is just kind of the evolution of that, which has been really good. Kind of 3 or 4 stories and from each of us and kind of things we're interested in. I do really appreciate that about Substack. The chance, we've talked about this a bit, chance to actually get on there and write and talk about the things that are interesting to us, and hopefully our audience ultimately kind of comes along with that, not having to be prescriptive about what we're writing about, which I really have enjoyed that significantly. So there's so much to cover. I'd like to talk, of a couple of things. One would be the JFK files were released yesterday. It's been sort of interesting to see what's trickling out in that and how people are responding to that. I don't think there's anything really earth-shattering in there other than it actually happened, that it actually came out, which has been a promise for a long time. And actually that it is earth-shattering that it actually happened.
Yeah, I'm amazed it happened. Although, to be honest with you, I've not sat and read through these things. The JFK shooting has never been particularly interesting to me. It's not disinteresting. It was never my thing. But from what I'm getting, it seems like most of it was out already. No? And these are really just the things that kind of the final things that never got released because a lot of it's really poor quality. And, hasn't Kash Patel himself said you've already seen it and you should have your conclusions?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the interesting piece is that it's not redacted, which I think there's been a number of those things that even if, and there's a lot here. I mean, there's more here than I think people want to talk that they want to make it out to be, which is, I think it's been so long, and I think it's been sort of this conclusion by most Americans that are paying attention that this was an inside job. This was something either done by Lyndon Johnson, CIA, both, the mob, Cubans. I mean, there's this kind of sense of that. And the papers certainly are supporting of that. I mean, I think you're hearing this kind of undercurrent into the underside of this as to why this all happened. And a lot of the papers that are coming out are just explicitly that the CIA was involved. And we knew that, but I think they've never really admitted it. The government has never admitted it. And they've had this, well, we're going to hold these back because they're just so important to the health and safety of our military and our CIA agents and all the rest of it. It's just, they lied to us. And then they've held it back for no reason, really. I mean, everything on these papers is nothing new. This is all stuff that Oliver Stone exposed in 91 during his movie. I mean, I think none of this is really rocket science, but it speaks to the larger issue that you and I have talked about a number of times, which is the distrust of government breeds in extremism and it breeds in radicalism. And if you've been lied to about the simplest things, which are the things you think and know you're not lied to about, which is we knew the CIA was involved in this, but they've wanted to cover that up. It just builds in this animosity towards government. And I think it's something really, all of these things that are about whether it's the JFK files, the RFK files, or any other number of things on the UFO stuff, it's all just been there. We've all known it's there kind of underneath the surface, but you're never allowed to say it is. So I think it breeds a different kind of radicalism, and it's where we're at. Where we're at in all of this has come because of some of this, I think.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Although at the same time, it almost feels like this slow drip feed has in many ways sort of numbed a lot of people to this. Because, put it this way, the JFK files being released some time ago would have been this earth-shattering stuff, but it feels like since COVID, like I'm numb to things now because I've not looked at a single page of this stuff. I'm just another day.
I went through a bunch of it last night and some again this morning. There's some guys doing some really great stuff with it. I mean, Holden's out there reading every page, which is wild and not surprised, but very cool that that's happening. But also I just think as I've gone through it and kind of read through some of it, they're not it isn't earth-shattering, but it is earth-shattering that the CIA was involved in the murder of our own president. That is, I don't know that I'll ever really sort of be able to forgive that. And I think a lot of people that are in that generation can't, if they really will embrace it, I don't know that they can forgive it either.
You've got to remember, for a lot of people, and I'm guilty of this too, because I have real sort of imposter syndrome whenever I do something, whenever I've written books and I've worked for some pretty big organizations, behind the scenes with the work that I do. And, I've done big stuff, but I'm always telling myself I'm just this little guy and, I'm quite important. And honestly, that's probably true. But, everyone has this sort of self-doubt. And the reason I say that is you look at people in government as people who must be exceptionally more talented, exceptionally more gifted, exceptionally more special than you are. In many cases, that's just not true. I mean, look at, and I'm not saying this to insult her intelligence or anything, I'm not, but look at AOC, this whole line about, she was a bartender. First of all, grotesque classes, and I don't care that she was a bartender. She may well be fantastic. Happens that she's not. But, you get my point. Anyone can come from something and be something. In the UK, we have this woman, Diane Abbott, and she's just, I don't like to just be mean for the sake of being mean, and I'm not. This is not a clever woman. She's notoriously not a clever woman. And she is one of the most, recognizable members of parliament in the UK and has had considerable influence over the years over her party. And it's like, these people are not exceptional, but you look up to them as if they are. And so you assume that these people must be so good and the system must be so well oiled and so functional that nothing crazy could ever really happen. The things that we used to do in the past, in the Middle Ages, the days where, people would kill a king and become king themselves, all these things are still in here. It's still human, and we still do these things. Humans can be deeply corrupt. And if you don't think it's happening in government, but you do think it happens on a local level, but the drama between your friends, the drama in your local community, the drama in your business, the drama in your social life, that extends all the way up. And so these terrible things can indeed happen, but people just assume that they can't because it's too fanciful, too crazy an idea, and we must have moved on from the days of old, but we haven't. We're just monkeys in suits.
No, I saw somebody say that this is the most fundamental murder is about the preservation of yourself. You murder someone else for your own preservation, and really the CIA had every motivation to kill JFK. They had every motivation to kill Bobby Kennedy. They had every motivation to kill Martin Luther King. All of these were about their own self-preservation. If they didn't do it, they weren't going to survive as an organization. Holding back and hiding these files has been about that too. They've been about self-preservation all the way along. The Schlesinger one I posted this morning, I think, was the most interesting that I saw in the mix, which was the kind of a breaking down of, look, the CIA is making a mess everywhere. And especially the operations side of the CIA is making a big mess of things. We need to do something about it, and we need to stop it. We need to break it apart. That memo has been buried for 62 years for no real reason other than to recognize that there's this correlation between JFK saying we need to bust this thing into a million pieces, shatter the CIA into a million pieces, Schlesinger's memo, and then the push to say we're not going to Vietnam. I mean, I think that you can't underestimate a couple of things that he was doing. One, he was monkeying around with the money again. He was saying that we were going to go to the Treasury printing bills backed by silver, and that was going to be an alternative to the Federal Reserve currency. Can't take that away from what actually happened, and I don't think you can take the CIA stuff out of it. It's just wild to me that we're here, and now at this point, 62 years into it, you just kind of go, yeah, I guess our government murdered our own president, and it's kind of it kind of doesn't mean anything. It's just really, they've waited long enough now that, as you say, in the old days, the king cuts off the other king's head and becomes king. That's big news, and it's scandalous, and it's all these things. That's what happened in our own streets in Dallas. Nobody cares.
It's just been so long now that,
It's true.
People don't think about it as important anymore. And it's the same thing with the UFO stuff. And, I dread, somebody looking at me talking about UFOs and going, oh, he's a conspiracy theorist podcaster. No. For a long time, I used to joke about the UFO thing, about why is it always some guy from the deep south, with, straw in his mouth called Bubba or something, going, oh, I swear I saw one of those green men in the, and it's always that. And I suppose that's not fair, actually, because that's kind of being like, what is it, racist against Southern people. I'm not. It's just the stereotype in the UK, you know. And everyone always wondered, why is it always these people who see these UFOs? But actually, no, it's not. It's people in the military.
Yeah.
You know, my uncle, my great uncle, who was a Queen's Guard back in the day. He was in his 90s, I think, when he died, and he was still at his back straight, better posture than me. But he told me all over the years that he saw one land in the field too. And, you know, this is something that we've seen ourselves. We've had a million stories over the years. And then the government just gradually, bit by bit, just drops a little bit here and there. And eventually you just become so numb to it. And, hey, you know, it leaves you thinking that maybe there's more. Maybe there's more. Maybe that's why they drip feed it. Hey, you never know. Maybe there's more with the JFK stuff. Who knows? But I get the impression that really this was just the final drop and that it was not considered that important, if I'm honest with you. I have noticed now that we've got the anti-Semites on Twitter. Have you seen this? Well,
Yes.
it's something about Israel, so they must be doing that on purpose.
Yeah.
It never
I can't figure that one out. I really can't. I have no dog in that hunt, and I don't get it. I really don't get the sort of vehemence, the insistence that everything bad in the world happens as the result of the Mossad or Israel. I don't understand that. Also don't understand that criticizing the government of Israel and their actions, why that automatically makes you an anti-Semite. It's a very, very contentious piece. Like I said, I don't have a dog in that hunt, and it's really fascinating to me I've been to Israel a couple of times. I think it's a beautiful country. I think it has every right to exist as it is there, and you know, all those things. There's nothing there, but I do think it's, if I can't question my own government and I can't question the government of a foreign government, it's just an interesting dynamic, and you can't touch that rail.
I mean, I think it's, you know, the same reason why you can't really question Israel is the same reason why the politicians flip out when you question them too. You know,
Yeah.
Israel's an ally. It's not just an ally, though. It's really a sort of civilizational partner in many ways. It's kind of like a brother country. Or a mother country in some ways too, because it's, you know, the home of Christianity as well. So it's a different relationship that the United States has with Israel than any other country, really. I mean, maybe the closest thing is Britain. But, you know, just because you can't question it doesn't mean that it's some kind of global Jewish conspiracy. You know, it's as much a conspiracy as, well, the fact that they flip out when you question them. Look at how the Bidens responded when they were accused of very credible things that have since been proven true. Well, hell broke loose. You know, any government is going to try and cling to its power the best it can. And, you know, Israel's in a fight or flight situation. And really, their only option is to fight. And if the United States is their biggest ally, then you bet they're going to hang on to that support as best they can and cling on to whatever influence they can hold on to. And I don't blame them.
No, it is. Yeah, it's one I don't. I have avoided. Maybe I shouldn't, but I have avoided it in terms of conversation, because I just don't. I don't get it. I really don't.
Yeah, a lot of trouble too, because you say one thing, like I was just thinking when I just said that could easily be misinterpreted.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And I'm staunchly on the side of Israel and always have been, but, you know, take anything out of context and it can be misrepresented, and then your life's over. My life's already over. I've been cancelled. Good.
We've already crossed that bridge. Well, speaking of Europe and war, Ukraine, I wrote a piece a few weeks ago. I've always thought of Russia as the crazy uncle of Europe, that has an interest in being European. She has an interest in being European, whatever, but isn't. I mean, it's such a functionally large country that all the rest of Europe has been so skeptical of Russia's inclusion in European politics, and probably for justified reasons. They have been a bully at times. I'm just curious, from perspective of somebody from the UK, I know we talked about this and you don't necessarily have these answers. Why is there such an infatuation by the UK with a war with Russia? I don't understand it.
I mean, think about it this way. We've got this big, scary country run by what many people would call a dictator, although that's arguable, because he is people at the end of the day. But, you know, we have this big country, this very powerful one with more nuclear weapons than the United States, and frankly, more likelihood of using a nuclear weapon than the United States, at least right now, right on our border. So people are naturally kind of a bit, it's like, when your neighbor sells their house and you panic about, oh God, who's going to move in? Because you're always dreading of having this terrible neighbor who might make your life miserable. And that's kind of the feeling in Europe, I suppose. My Finnish friends can't stand the Russians. They're right there on the border. They can see them from their house, I guess that's a big driving force. But what I don't understand is the UK's obsession with this. In many ways, I think that the West has made mistakes over the years in partnership with the United States, specifically the eastward expansion of NATO. We told, and this, by the way, is not to excuse Russia of anything, which is wildly accused of. But Russia, for many years, was told there will be no eastward expansion. We won't have troops on your doorstep. And what do? We kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And it's like, if Europe really is scared of this crazy neighbor that they have, why do we keep pushing their buttons and, knocking on their door and buzzing their doorbell? It's like, are we trying to annoy them? Not only that, but lying and saying that we're not going to expand eastwards and then doing it. Something was going to happen sooner or later. And in many ways, one might say that the West has been the aggressor in some cases.
I agree with that.
I'm not saying that Russia is without fault. Let me make that absolutely clear. I've written about this extensively. I used to work for 1945.com. I'm hoping to write for them some more again soon, actually. But I reported on the Ukraine conflict for them for nearly 2 years. And it was really fascinating because, what the Ukrainians are going through is dreadful. They should not have been put in this position. They're losing their homes. Families are being destroyed. Entire cities have been completely flattened. This country is flattened. And it didn't have to happen. And you bet the Ukrainians are going to fight. It's the same way the Brits were fighting in World War II before America came over. People forget, America came over and fought, but there was a lot went on before that. And it was, my grandfather's house was flattened too. We fought and fought and fought because we were protecting our country, our values, our democracy. And of course, I'm sure Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson's guests would disagree with me on that lately. But it's just defending oneself and one's pride and one's family and one's history. And so you cannot blame the Ukrainians for that. But at the same time, Russia has been prodded and poked for all these years. And now we're in a position where, Russia really feels no reason to stop. Why would they? They don't have the official support of China, as in China's not sending them tanks unless something's changed since I've been covering this. But China's not directly sending them weaponry because they know that if they do that, they're going to be in trouble with the West, and the West funds China effectively via trade. But they kind of have their soft support. And if push comes to shove, China's on Russia's side.
Of course.
And Russia also has the help, for whatever it's worth, of North Korea. And, that might well just be some soldiers who don't speak Ukrainian or Russian who can be thrown to the meat grinder on the front lines, which is what they're doing. And that has some value. North Korea has provided some manufacturing services for them, and that has some value. And Russia, with the sanctions, is learning to fend for itself, too.
Yes.
You may remember we cut off a lot of the import of supplies for passenger airplanes a couple of years ago. Well, Russia's been busy. They've started making them themselves. Now the Russian planes are being rebuilt and manufactured using Russian parts. Russia doesn't have to give this up. They can keep going. They've been fighting this war for so long now using almost 100-year-old technology. So we've got to ask ourselves, are we willing to compromise? Do we actually want peace or not? Because this war could go on for a very long time. Right? Maybe 20 years, who knows?
Oh, well, if we found anything out about the 20th century or 21st century Western civilization is that wars are designed to just perpetuate themselves. That's all we ever do is just fight long wars and send more material and men to die. And especially as you get more technology involved in it with drones and everything else, the impact becomes less and less upon the human. And so it just kind of goes on. And the civilian is the only one that really is destroyed. If I'm Putin, I think both of us would say this, we're not apologizing for they're wrong. They should not have invaded. But if I'm him, And I know what the CIA has been capable of around the world, and I've watched it happen. And then in 2014, I realized that the CIA is once again meddling with this stuff in Ukraine to overthrow a duly elected government, all for whatever, kind of platitudinal nonsense that they always make up and propagandize for people. I know that. Of course, I'm going to be very leery of what is happening within a neighboring country with adjacency within 150 miles of my capital city. I'm going to be pretty leery of what's happening, and I'm going to be incredibly skeptical of the United States' involvement in any of that, and especially when they've been disingenuous about what they've said at the table. We're not coming east. We're not doing this. We're not expanding NATO. This is the end of the Cold War. Except it wasn't. There's now 13 additional new countries in NATO that weren't there when the Soviet Union dissolved. So I feel like we have, as you say, maybe we've been the instigator in this on some level, or the aggressor. We're not out there firing weapons, but we are backdooring all of this stuff in order to make our objective come to fruition. We want this war. I mean, we do. And I don't understand it. I can't for the life of me get my head around why both all of Europe and really up until Trump, the United States driving this bus towards this absolute holocaust of nonsense. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason for it. It makes no sense to me.
I think there's two reasons. It's the military-industrial complex, it's private profit and lobbying, and it's also regime change. Everyone thinks that all of this could be motivated by one conspiracy. So it's the industrial military complex doing everything. No, it's a big part of it. It's a big part of it. They have a lot of vested interests in governments all over the West. But that being said, there has to be more than just a few lobbying arms and a few dollars being chucked at these politicians. It's not just about that. They have to find reasons to justify it to themselves too. And that reason, even if it's secondary, even if really it's because lobbyists telling them to do this or that or the other, people are still going to act in a way that they can defend. And if they can defend this war by saying, well, actually this is about, or at least telling themselves that this is about regime change, which I think is what's going on in their head, then they'll do it. And, we may have touched on this before, but I remember, I think it was in 2022, Boris Johnson, effectively, who was then our prime minister, effectively stopped a deal from happening. There was a deal. Oh, yeah. The signatures, the initials were on that deal. And Boris Johnson was sent to Ukraine by Joe Biden to stop that deal, and it stopped. Ukrainian insiders released that information. I wrote about that, in fact, actually in the book that I did about Kennedy, The Truth Teller. And I remember reporting on it at the time. And Boris Johnson reportedly said that this was the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to put Putin back in his box. That's what this was about.
100%. That's interesting. Kennedy was always right about Ukraine all the way through it. I mean, everything he talked about and what was happening and how all of this stuff with NATO and everything else, what I understand of it from an American perspective is totally shaped and framed by what I heard him talk about on the campaign. And then to go back and realize, this is exactly what's happened. We have installed, I read this really fascinating book this last week called the Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And it's a fabulous book. It's one to pick up and read. And it's all about how the United States has used the CIA and our sort of back end manufacturing and industrial side of things and our war machine to go sort of pin and push these people into really bad corners, these countries all around the world into really bad corners. And we've done it over and over again, especially in Eastern Europe, where we have basically lent money for them to build up their NATO. Whenever they come into NATO, they have to then come up to NATO standards in terms of what sort of weaponry and what kind of defense systems they have. Well, they have to buy all of that from us. So they buy it from us, which we have lent them the money to do so. And then when they can't pay it back, then we confiscate their material. We confiscate their minerals. We confiscate their land. There's some trade-off in terms of how the debt is paid back. It's a really bad system. It's made a lot of enemies around the world. And, to go all the way back to the Schlesinger conversation from the JFK files, that's really what's happened. And I think America has done this over and over again since the end of the Second World War. And we've made no friends doing so. China's doing the same thing currently. They're out there in the Silk Road world, and they're doing a lot of these same kind of tactics that the United States has done, but they do it in a very different way, in which they're not necessarily as aggressive or threatening as we have been. When I was a kid, I remember our country invaded Panama for like a 14-minute period one afternoon. And I never understood why. We were told it was about Manuel Noriega and this bad, but really it was because he was talking to the Japanese about building a different canal that wasn't going to be subjected to all of the agreements that the United States was forcing them into. And we came in with force and did that. Chinese aren't doing that. They're kind of coming up with similar ways in which they can confiscate and utilize these material money. Yeah, exactly. And I just, this is a really tenuous time in the world. And I don't know, I'm glad Trump is there, but I would feel much more confident with somebody that understood it fundamentally, not from the bullying sort of, hey, our military is always right, our State Department's always kind of the good guys, the FBI, they're just honorable G-men, the good guy. None of that. It's all kind of nonsense. We really don't have we have a very corrupt system. It's been demonstrated to be very corrupt, and it's been demonstrated to show that no matter what anybody comes in, whether it's Elon Musk or Data Republican or whoever else, and finds this stuff, you can cut off the artery and it will spin right around to go backfill everything that's happening, because this machine they've a vested interest in seeing this machine sustain itself in perpetuity.
I think that's a really interesting point. It feels like we're exerting strength, or we're displaying and peacocking strength.
Yes, it's projecting it for sure.
Yeah. But do we understand this, or as a royal we, does Trump understand this at a structural level? I'm not claiming that I do, but I'm not the president. Does Trump understand this at a structural level? I feel like Kennedy has a better grasp on that. And what I would say, actually, is this talk of the profit side of war traditionally was of the left, is no longer of the left. And I've seen that gradually change, actually. And it's not just the last few years. This has gradually been changing for some time now. Because I remember in my old days, as everybody knows, when I was a kid, I used to operate in sort of white nationalist circles in my teens. Long story, if you don't know the story already, go back a few episodes or read my book from 2020, Monster of Their Own Making. I remember going to meetings of these really, really hardcore right-wingers, white nationalists, some of them neo-Nazis, and they were talking about profit in war. But I heard it nowhere else. It was becoming less and less popular a talking point on the left, and it was the real hard right that was talking about it. So I don't know, it's interesting now that it seems to be coming back, and it's more mainstream now, and I think that's good, but it would be really nice if we had a president that understood it too, because this, peacocking is going to do so much, and we're going to be able to scare a few people, but it doesn't work universally, and not just on a military level, by the way, economic too. Like what Trump is doing with Canada, I have no doubt that Trump has the cards and Canada doesn't. But you think Canada's not going to fight? Of course they're going to.
Yeah.
You think Europe's not going to fight? Of course they're going to. And maybe we need to be a bit more pragmatic about this. I'm all in on a lot of the tariff stuff, by the way.
Me too.
But when I see tariffs of 200%, I'm like, let's see how that goes. Because, the European Union, for example, Trump has the cards, as he says, but the European Union and Canada are being quite smart about this. What they're doing is, in response, they're targeting Republican states with their own tariffs. And that's pretty brutal. And you could argue, in a sense, that it's almost like election interference. And that's the line that Trump will use in the future as foreign election interference. The kind of is. My point is, we've got to learn to work with our neighbors and our partners, and where there is injustice, we need to talk about it and solve it. And I think Trump is good at that, and also not good at that. We're seeing both sides here. I think on Russia, Trump has been pretty good.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think we're closer to a peace conversation there than we've been, and certainly we're not actively promoting what Joe Biden was promoting, which is basically this is our laundry machine for all the money we ever need. Yeah, I've got some connections in close proximity to the military, some friends and close family folks that have been involved in that. And their position, which they're sort of higher up in the military, their position that all of this is necessary, that what we're doing is really necessary because what we're doing is sending our old weapon system to Ukraine, and then we're able to buy new ones because of this, through this whole kind of scheming and laundering of money. That, I think, is not as actively being participated in as it was 2 years ago, where we were just, every dollar that went out of the door was intended for us, and it's intended to come back to us. And we've got these kind of terrible strings and terrible deals attached to everything that we do. I don't think that's happening anymore. And I think that's a really good positive step in the right direction. I just would like to see some fundamental understanding of how do you get back to a peaceful Europe. And I don't know if I have a good answer there. I don't know if Trump does either. It's got to be an imperative on the conversation. Like, how do we get back to a peaceful Europe in which we allow Russia to be what it is, which is, a third European and then 2/3 Asian. I mean, really, the size of that country has much more adjacency to Asia than it does Europe. But Moscow and St. Petersburg have always wanted to be European. And so if we would allow that neighborly relationship to at least be thriving, I don't know. I think there's a path there to peace, but it's going to take much cooler heads than we currently have. The blustering is.
I was very lucky in 2018 to see St. Petersburg. At first, I didn't want to go. I told my wife, there's not a chance in hell I'm going. I do not want to end up in a Russian prison for 12 years for nothing, And eventually I went. It was my sister-in-law had cancer and she just finished her treatment. So we took her as a treat. She always wanted to Russia. And it was a stunning city. It's kind of artificially representative of Russia. It's not really Russia because it's had some government money put in it. But it's still stunningly European, as you say. And wouldn't it be great if we can return to a time, it's been rocky for a long time. Wouldn't it be great if we could create a new era in which Russia participates in sort of the European experience in some ways? I think it would be great. Putin's not going to be alive forever. Things change over time. And I think maybe we need to ask ourselves, is military regime change really the most likely way to kill this monster? I don't think so, because we're just constantly creating enemies, and we'll always be enemies with Russia. Maybe we have to dance with the devil for a little while. It's not a fun thing to envision. It's not really what we want to do. Nobody wants to appease something we see as negative or harmful, and which is indeed harmful in many ways for people who suffer in Russia and the Uyghurs, for example. But that being said, we have to think pragmatically and long-term, I think. And I think the only way we can do that is by just making some concessions, having difficult conversations, admitting where we have been wrong, and plotting a new way forward. And that's going to mean a lot of change. Ukraine's probably not going to like what they have to do territorially.
No,
nobody likes to say this, but I mean, what do we want? Perpetual war?
No, and I don't think the Ukrainians do either. And I think had the 2014 election held up over time, I think you would have seen a much more conversational moment towards peace in which there were concessions. Boundaries on maps are always just drawn by people who are the worst kinds of people. And so, whether that's a zoning map at a city council meeting or that's a country's borders, most of the time they're drawn by people who are ignorant to actually what's happening on the ground. And I think Ukraine's a very perfect example of that, especially after the breakup of the Soviet Union. If you realize like how much some of those people are connected to Russia still, and some of them are Ukrainian and some of them are Crimean, this is all very messy and not something that's just as simple as saying, well, because of the map that was drawn in 1992, that this is how this is. You think about other parts of Europe and other sort of self-governing and self-autonomous countries, whether that's Bosnia and Herzegovina and these other, Yugoslavia doesn't exist today, and it doesn't exist for a reason, because those people couldn't put themselves under that same border. I think there's something to that in Ukraine too. And I think if you ask the people of Ukraine and not the Europeans who want to talk about what Ukraine should be, this kind of monolithic, all one size fits all conversation. I think you might find that there are people who have different ties, familiarity with their family or otherwise, it's familiarity, their language, other things. I mean, there's a huge portion of Ukraine that does not speak Ukrainian. They speak Russian.
The Russian. Listen, I understand how painful it is. I really do, because in 2014, I don't know how publicized this was in the States back then, but we had a referendum for Scotland to decide whether it wanted to remain in the United Kingdom, and thankfully voted 52% to stay in. And I was overjoyed with that. I'm British, and I'm actually part Scottish, mostly Scottish blood, although I am English. And the thought of them leaving is just deeply sad. It troubled the Queen greatly. Scotland was absolutely one of her favorite places of the UK. Her favorite castle was up there, and she spent so much time in Scotland. And the King does now, too. And there was a very controversial claim made by former Prime Minister David Cameron, who told the newspapers that the Queen, quote, heard down the phone when he told her that Scotland voted to remain in the United Kingdom. It was controversial because you never meant to explain or publicize the Queen's political views. But everyone knew. And so, there's a lot of emotion there.
Yeah.
And there's a reality that Scotland will probably leave the UK eventually, probably in my lifetime, I think. And also, Northern Ireland is a very, very tricky one, because Northern Ireland is still British. Well, it's not technically British, but it's part of the United Kingdom. And that's a very contentious situation too. So we have our own problems, and it seems to just be a reality of Europe, of time passing by and things changing. And it's not fun. I don't want to see it happen in my lifetime, but it's something that's going to happen and will affect my family.
Well, I think it's an interesting segue into the United States to some degree, because the states themselves are intended to be autonomous federalist system in which the states have their own boundaries based upon a commonality, whether that's common, interests or kind of people groups or whatever. That was the intention initially. I mean, a South Carolinian is different than a North Carolinian, and there was a reason that those boundaries got drawn, and they're very different than Bostonians, and they're very different than people from New Jersey, for instance. So all of those things were intended to be sort of shaping based on their commonality amongst them. And this idea in the 20th century that has been pretty pervasive, which is that you need monolithic big countries in order to make sure that everyone's destiny is marching in the same direction. I have a feeling that what we're going to see in the next 20 years is a lot of that busting up. I feel like that's going to need to happen on some level, this sort of pulling back to a smaller autonomous world in which the people that you are surrounded by are the people that you have sort of commonality around. And maybe there is a reason why someone in the Donbass is not going to be in Ukraine. Someone in Crimea is not going to be a part of that sort of world. And that might be the same case for the UK. It might be the same for the United States. I mean, I can envision very quickly a place in which the United States says, I can't do this anymore. I can't understand. And secession in the United States has been a conversation from the very beginning. From like almost immediately, there were people that were saying they did not want to be in the Union. It's never really popularized, and it's never really something that's a conversation that Americans want to have, because there's this kind of grandiosity around the Civil War and sort of this, we held the Union together, which, if you really think about it, I'm not sure you can get young men to go out and give their lives for the preservation of a Union. There's something strange about that whole conversation and what it's become, and sort of the deification of all of that moment in our world. But the United States has been talking about secession from the very beginning. I mean, right from the start of the Constitution, you had Massachusetts and New York both who wanted to get out. They had buyer's remorse from the minute they signed the Constitution. In fact, that you have people that New Jersey's even a question if it even fully ratified the Constitution and voted to join the Union. So there's all these things that have always been a part of how do you keep yourself autonomous, governable at a scale that's reasonable. And I think that's a question about Europe that I think has to be answered, which is, are we better off because we've moved towards a European Union? Are we better off because we've moved to this monolithic United States? Is that a better thing? Is Canada better off because Quebec is there, or if they seceded from the country, which has been a part of their history and referendums in the past too? Are we better off because of that? And I don't know. I don't have that answer, but I feel like somewhere in this is the question that would lead us closer to peace rather than moving to these bigger sort of Eurasia 1984 stuff where you have three basic superpowers around the world. I think we'd be better off to be smaller.
It's an interesting point because it feels to me that the European Union was kind of, or at least the Brexit referendum to leave the EU was kind of the start of this whole system crumbling. Because, there's a lot of countries in the EU that are deeply skeptical of that entire system, but they remain within it because they benefit from it economically for now. Yes. The UK didn't really benefit from it economically. In fact, we put in more money than we got back out. That was the whole scandal. Well, not scandal, but a big part of it. But look at Poland, and the governing party of Poland is conservative, Law and Justice. I think Law and Justice is still in power. Yeah, you're off, Sław Kaczynski. And they, their members are skeptical of Europe. And I've been out to Poland and interviewed them and met with leaders of these conservative parties and even, parties further to the right than the governing party. And they all tell me the same thing. They're skeptical of the EU. They don't like the way the system works because members of European Parliament cannot propose laws. They can only rubber stamp it. But at the same time, Poland is benefiting from it right now. And for as long as they economically benefit from it, they'll probably never leave it. But the time is coming when that will change because Poland is getting stronger and bigger. Yes. It's a more competitive country. It's a more attractive country to investors now. Every time I go back to Warsaw, there's new skyscrapers. It's crazy. And there will come a time, probably, I think, when the EU starts to crumble and these countries start to leave, especially, if Le Pen wins in France and these other nationalist leaders across Western Europe start winning, which it looks like is slowly happening now, especially with Gen Z leaning further right than the millennials. It's going to be an interesting time. And yeah, it's funny because we might see exactly what you're saying. We might see the crumbling of these big monolithic systems. Who's to say that can't happen in Russia?
Totally.
Go ahead.
No, I totally agree with that. I mean, there's no reason, there's no connection to Moscow on the, the coast that's closest to Japan and Asia. I mean, there's almost no connection to Moscow other than it's under the same roof. Russia's unique because the weather's so terrible and it's so big and nobody really wants that space either. But I think they would become a much more interesting place and a much more peaceful place with some of that separation happening. And I think it goes all the way back to some of the conversations around Putin. I mean, he's held together a country that has every reason to fall apart for a long period of time. Russia is demonstrably better than it was at the end of the Soviet Union. And I don't know that you can't dismiss what he's been able to accomplish in his time there. He's held it together. He's held Russia together. But like you said, there's a day when Putin will not be there. And I don't know that there's a charismatic enough leader or someone who has sort of the strongman, good guy vibe that Putin has. I don't think Russia can hold it together. And I do think eventually in the next 20 years, you're just going to see people say, there's no reason. I benefit for nothing to be in these huge monolithic things. I don't benefit from it.
So there's a deep skepticism of the West in Russia. You may remember those adverts that went viral years ago, and it was Russians and Americans on a plane where the Russians are listening to the Americans complaining that their food isn't vegan and stuff.
Right.
And it was, it was funny. But there's this deep skepticism of the West, and the woke stuff is a big part of it. It's not entirely all of it, obviously. It's the deep history and the war and all that. But the woke stuff doesn't help. They feel no connection to the West because the West has gone mad.
Right.
But we're seeing things kind of shift now. And look at Gavin Newsom and even Schumer the other day giving in to the continuing resolution. I think the Democrats are starting to realize we've gone a bit mad here. And they're trying to come to the center. Now, I don't believe Newsom's being genuine. I'm taking you on a wild tour here, but I don't think he's being genuine. But nonetheless, he is going to the center because he knows that the party is gradually moving in that direction. Now, if the Democrats move in that direction, the Republicans are pushing it too. We may be entering this new age of America where things start to feel, except for AI, things start to feel like the 90s again, where you can say some stupid jokes. I was looking at one of these new comedians that's doing the circuit now, and he's got like a mustache like this. I forget his name. Andrew Schultz, I think his name is. Okay. and he's up there on stage now, and he's just cracking gay jokes like it's the 90s. I actually think it's hilarious. Like, it's just like the world's healing. We're normal again. We can like poke fun at one another and still love each other. Like, that's really interesting. And if this happens in the West, if this culture shift changes, and if we're able to negotiate peace with Russia, and if we can normalize relations enough that we're not really selling out, but we're potentially laying the framework for a new future for Russia working with us, and then long-term for Russia too. If we can just connect with each other in these ways gradually, and feel more of a kinship with one another. And I know it sounds like I'm talking spiritually here, but I think it's important. If we can feel that kinship, then maybe in the long term, Russia wants to work with us. Maybe in the long term, things change, and governments, we get a long march regime change rather than going in and shooting everybody or dropping a nuclear bomb.
Yeah. No, I think I actually have that hope. I think so. A lot of the things that have seen change in government, even this year in the United States, have a lot more to do with sort of that, the Tulsi Gabbards, the RFK phenomenon, the Joe Rogan people who at one point in their life, certainly considered themselves a lot more Democrat, a lot more liberal than what they are certainly aligning with now. That's softening some things in a lot of people, and I think it's really good. Last thing before we go, I'd like to hear your kind of impressions on the Trump administration's first month. And we're not into 100 days yet, but we're getting awfully close. So what's your impression of where they're at?
So obviously, the thing I'm most pleased with is that Kennedy's in there. He's already talking about getting food dyes out. He's already talking about baby infant formula. That matters to me because when we had our son, I remember we were talking to the doctor and we were just breastfeeding, but he was having some trouble at the time. And they said, well, what about formula? And I was really hesitant. He needed to eat, but I was hesitant on the formula. And I told them, I don't trust what's in it. And the look they gave me, it's like it had two heads.
Oh, I know.
I'm trying to explain to them, you don't know what's in this stuff. And so we talked, and eventually for a very brief period, we used some formula, and then he went entirely breast. But I got it from Europe. I think I bought it from a European provider. It's a tragedy and a scandal that the United States has allowed itself to be poisoned in this way for so long. So thank God that Kennedy's in there doing this. So that's my biggest takeaway. But actually secondary is, I have to say I'm disappointed. The border stuff, great. He's following through on protecting the border. That wasn't a difficult job, by the way. It's great that he's doing it, but it was never a difficult job. And Biden could have done this without legislation a long time ago. So, credit where credit's due, but really there's not that much credit to, doing something that simple, sending troops to the border and defending it. Okay. I feel like the Trump administration lacks vision. They're very good at saying Biden screwed this up, but we're going to fix it. But they're not very good at envisioning the America that comes after this 4-year Trump administration. The biggest driver of change there being AI. And I've heard nothing but positive stuff about AI. Because Trump is being told by these big tech CEOs, all of whom hated him 6 months ago, by the way, that AI will be this huge economic boom for the United States, and it's going to be great, and we're going to get all this investment, and we're going to beat China. And I think that has impressed Trump. But Trump is, 80 years old? He doesn't,
78, yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't know what AI is. Let's be honest here. He does not know what this technology is, nor does he know the damage that it's about to cause. And I had hoped that J.D. Vance, being the working class guy that he is, would have recognized the threat that it poses. You're talking between, we talked about this before, but between sales and administrative workers, that's over 20 million people. Then people in the creative industry, that's several more million on top of that. Tens of millions of people's jobs are at risk in the next couple of years alone, probably before the midterms. The Trump administration's not talking about it. And to make things worse, I heard J.D. Vance the other day saying that AI is not only going to be this huge boom for the economy, but it dignifies our workforce, he says. It dignifies our workforce. And my question to J.D. Vance, and I'm going to write about this as soon as I can, is how? Does it dignify the people who lose their jobs to AI, because there are people already losing their jobs right now. My
Oh, of
business is
course.
still really, really struggling because of it. But there are people right now sat at their desk training AI to replace them. And there was uproar when Disney made workers train their H-1B replacements. But there is no uproar about the bosses across America right now making their staff train AI systems that will replace them. JD's not talking about it. Trump's not talking about it. And that is a huge letdown.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think very fair to it. I'm kind of with you. I'm very happy with what Kennedy's done. I know there's a lot of people still frustrated by his lack of just instantaneously getting rid of the mRNA stuff and the kind of vaccine schedule. I understand that. I understand that frustration. But I told somebody on the phone today, if you're starting at that perspective that all of these things are good because that's what you've been told your whole life, this is how you solve all of your medical issues is with a pill or a shot. It's really hard to go like all the way to, well, they're all bad.
Right.
That's a really big leap. I think it's really hard for people. So I keep falling back on the fact that I do trust him to try to build a case as if he's an attorney, which I think he is, and he's very good at that. He's never really lost a case in relationship to some of this stuff. He's going to build a really good case that the studies are there to show that these things aren't what everybody has purported them to be. If he does that and can get rid of it, then I think we'll start to see some really fast moves. It is interesting to me. The biggest dynamic change, or the biggest dynamic I see in difference between Trump and Kennedy. He's so methodical about the things that he's doing. He's very strategic. He's very good at politics. I think people underestimate how good he is at this. Moving, chewing away at these things, taking wins where he can get them, making a big difference where he can. And then, he's got all of this world around him that's still talking about all this. Dale Bigtrees are out there doing podcasts about what's, the negativities around the medical industrial complex. He's got, a lot of people, Nicole Shanahan included, that are talking about the negatives around what's out there in the world. He's not addressing them directly, but he's letting that kind of group of people make their noise. And I think that's really good. In terms of the Trump administration, I'm very happy with a lot of things. The money thing is the biggest thing to me. We've talked about this a number of times. The money is always the biggest issue to me. How do you fix this mess that we have made with debt, with spending, with government just perpetually kind of obliterating your future? If your debt payments are larger than your tax revenues, which is where we are at, you live in a Ponzi scheme. There's no way around that. And we're there. So I think that piece of it, I'm very happy with what Musk has done and sort of seeing some of those things. My disappointments are this has to all become forcefully legislated. And I don't think Trump's very good with Congress. That's my takeaway, is that I don't think he's as aggressive with Congress as he needs to be. And he picks on the wrong people. He picks on Massey and he picks on the people that are his real allies in Congress. And he's just not very good with Congress. Mike Johnson's a miserable speaker in my opinion. Nice guy. I'm sure he's a fine person, but not a very good speaker, not a very good forceful person. I don't think the whip situation in Congress is very good. And I just don't think Trump's very good with Congress. And he likes the executive order much more than he likes Congress. That will bite him.
So tell me if you think I'm wrong here. Trump's not good with Congress because Congress doesn't like him. And I think the reason Congress doesn't like him is his messaging and his tone. He makes himself a lot of enemies. And a lot of those enemies he can't avoid having. But I do think Trump's mannerism and the way he presents himself and the way he treats people turns a lot of people off. I do think he could have more friends. I do think he could have won this fight in a different way. But given that he's controversial, I think it makes it hard for many people in Congress to work with him more closely than they already do because of that, because they're terrified of losing their next election by 100 votes, which it might only be. And I think that is a big part of the problem. So, Trump is doing what he can right now, but as you say, this could all be undone in 4 years. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier. I feel like the Trump administration is lacking vision, what the country's actually going to look like in the future. I think Trump is envisioning that we go back to the 1960s or 50s or something. And I don't mean, segregation laws what I know everyone thinks
No.
when you say going back to the 50s, but I think Trump has this vision of going back to this era of American exceptionalism and growth and booming economy and manufacturing. And I do think that will come, but it's going to be a very different world than it was back then.
I think that's a good assessment. My take is Congress underestimates the value that Trump brings in terms of the actual implementation of things that the American people want done. I think the people voted for Trump because they want what Trump has said he wants to do. You know, he doesn't want more wars. He wants a solid border. He wants to bring manufacturing home. He wants to make other people across the ocean pay for our goods and services through tariffs. He wants to reduce income taxes. That's what the people want. Congress underestimates the message that that resonates with the Trump voter. So they've got that piece going on. And then you have Trump that doesn't understand how to work with Congress, who are always worried about their next election. So there's this kind of conflict that builds in the middle, which is they're underestimating the value of the Trump voter. So we're always pissed off that Congress doesn't do what they need to do. And Trump is saying the messages that he wants, but Congress thinks, well, I can't win if I follow that message because he's too bombastic, which I think is an underestimation by Congress. I think he's not as bombastic as people want to make him out to be in certain places.
Yeah.
He picks on the wrong things, and that's always, and the media cycle in DC is just built around the media cycle in DC. What did the next politician say about the last politician? And that's how we talk about things in terms of media. And so I think both of those things are causing this moment of frustration. And he's got to figure it out. He's got to figure out how to work with Congress, because if he doesn't, I just don't know. I don't think you're just going to see, more of the same blustering and a lot of executive orders, but which all can be undone with a stroke of a pen next time around, or an auto pen, whether you're on that.
Well, I feel like all of this could come undone. All of the good that's being done could be stopped, all because of poor messaging. And
for sure.
Thankful for a lot of what Elon's doing, not all of it, but for a lot of it. And I do think that standing on stage with a chainsaw didn't really help him. It was funny, but for the people who were skeptical, not so funny. I was speaking to one of my neighbors the other day. She's 80 years old. And she told me, I'm real scared. She's moving away. She's leaving the country. She's scared. And she's, I know those radical loony lefties who've got $1 billion in the bank, and they can move wherever they want just to make a point and grandstand. This is someone who doesn't have all that money, and someone who is, regardless, leaving the country because she's that scared of Trump. Now, I've spoke to her about it and tried to tell her, some of the things that she's scared of are not actually happening. And the other day she was telling me about how she's terrified she's going to lose her Social Security, but she's not. Especially at her age, I might lose it, and my family might lose it. My kid might not have access to it, but she'll be fine. But that's not Trump's fault, by the way. That's because it's a Ponzi scheme.
Exactly.
My point is the messaging is not helping. The aggressive approach they're taking is not winning people over. And Trump feels like, because he doesn't have to run for election again, that maybe it doesn't matter. But somebody's going to have to run for election to replace him. And it's, the Democrats are presumably going to want to win. But I don't think it will be so easy if all of this good stuff that they're doing can be painted in certain ways just because of the way they've behaved over the last 4 years. So I think they have to be careful about that.
Yep. Politics it still has consequences, even if the underlying thing below it doesn't like politics and is indifferent to it. Politics matters, at least on the surface, in order to try to, if you're going to undo anything that's underneath all of this, I think you have to win politics over and over and over again. And the Trump sort of methodology to win is good for him. He's good at it, but I haven't seen anybody else who's been able to ever do it. And if you're going to keep this up and try to undo all of this, which I think has to happen if we're going to survive as a nation, you're going to have to figure out how to get Congress to participate or win elections where you have a Congress full of people like Massey or Rand Paul or Chip Roy or whoever else. You've got 10 good guys in the House and maybe 5 good in the Senate. The rest of them are all just indifferent, sort of useless losers and they're all very good at being that. They're good at being in Washington. I think if he learns how to work with Congress, which is I said it a long time ago, if he keeps Kennedy close, he could figure this out. I just don't know. We'll see if he does or not.
Yeah. It's going to be an interesting time ahead. I'm really just kind of accepting that I'm just on the ride here, and I'm just because
we're all on the ride. That's for sure. Well, good stuff. Great to talk this week. Hopefully we can get back to it again sooner and a little more on schedule, but I'm really, it's always fun to talk. And I think there's some, I hope people will subscribe, but where if they're into this for an hour, I hope that they're already subscribers, but if they aren't, we'd sure love people to continue to participate. We like doing what we're doing. I think it's been fun. I think our audience is starting to kind of learn our voices. And I think that's an exciting thing to see happen too. And getting a lot of comments and people talking back and forth with us through Substack. So appreciate everybody doing that. And until next time, thanks for listening, and we'll see you down the road.
Thank you, everyone.